Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping right into your source material today. Specifically, an excerpt you shared. It's called day14.mp3.
Right.
And the topic, well, it's a challenge I think pretty much everyone learning English bumps into.
Yeah.
Those common grammar mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling is so universal, isn't it? You're talking and suddenly you pause and think, hang on, was that correct?
Exactly. Or someone corrects you, and you're left wondering, why was that wrong? What rule did I miss there? Your source really gets into that feeling.
It does. It taps right into that uncertainty.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to unpack this specific source you sent over. We want to pull out the most important insights it offers about these mistakes people make all the time.
And crucially, the simple ways to fix them.
Yes, the simple, practical ways it suggests you can overcome them. The aim is really to help you sound, well, more natural, more confident when you're speaking English.
And it's probably good to say right at the top, which your source also mentions, making mistakes with grammar. It's totally normal. It's part of learning.
Completely. Everyone does it. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're just starting or, you've been speaking English for ages. Little things slip in, especially when you're just talking naturally.
Especially in spontaneous conversation, yeah. Little slips happen.
So the goal here isn't about, suddenly becoming grammatically perfect overnight.
No, not at all.
It's more about making progress, becoming more aware, and having a clearer idea, based on your source,
Yeah.
of how to handle the most common issues.
Exactly. Think of it like we're taking a guided tour through the key points in your source material. We'll highlight where learners often trip up, according to this source, and understand the core grammar ideas the source provides to help navigate those tricky spots.
Okay, let's dive into that universal challenge then.
Okay.
The source really sets the scene by acknowledging that feeling of, doubt. Have you listening right now ever felt unsure? Is this sentence right?
Or maybe you've been corrected and just didn't quite get the why behind it.
Yeah.
That experience is so common. Your source really validates that, saying, it's not just you. It happens to everyone at pretty much all levels.
Right. Even really advanced learners sometimes make small errors. Maybe they're thinking fast
Or their first language structure creeps in a bit. Happens all the time.
It's actually kind of comforting to know you're not alone in that.
Definitely.
And the good news, according to this source, is that a lot of these frequent mistakes, they aren't based on super complex, obscure rules.
No, often they're about fundamental English structures, things that once you kind of click with them become much easier to handle. Your source really emphasizes that knowing what the common mistake is and knowing the simple fix, that can make a massive difference.
Right. It's about targeted improvement.
Precisely. The objective your source lays out is very focused. Let's look at the most common errors, and let's find simple ways to correct them. It's all about making those small, conscious adjustments so your sentences sound more natural, more confident, and you avoid those little things that might flag it as grammatically non-standard.
So, according to your source, where does this journey into common mistakes begin? It kicks off with some really tiny, but apparently very powerful words.
Ah, yes. The articles a, and the. Your source flags the misuse of these as one of the top grammar mistakes learners make.
And they're just so small,
Yeah.
one or two letters, it's hard to believe they can cause so much trouble.
I know, right? But your source makes a really strong point. These little words can actually change the meaning or at least the implication of your whole sentence.
Okay, so getting them right is about precision.
Absolutely. It's critical for clarity in English, and your source lays out the core rule very nicely and simply. Use a or an for something general, something not specific.
Okay, general, non-specific. Got it.
And use the for something specific, something that maybe you've already mentioned or it's clear from the context which one you mean, or maybe there's only one of them.
Right, specific or unique. Let's really break this down with the examples the source provides. It starts with, I saw a cat in the street. Using a there, what's the message?
Well, using a tells the listener that this is just any cat. It wasn't a particular cat we were looking for or talking about earlier.
Right.
It's just one random cat out of maybe many cats. A introduces this singular, unspecified noun into the conversation for the first time.
Indefinite.
Okay.
And then the source contrasts this immediately with, but if I say I saw the cat on my neighbor's porch, why the now?
Because, as your source explains, the signals that this cat is specific. When you say the cat, you're implying that the listener knows which cat, or it's the one relevant to the situation.
Ah, so maybe it's the neighbor's actual pet.
Could be. Or maybe you were just talking about a stray cat problem in the area. Or maybe it's the only cat you can see right there. The they makes it definite. We both understand, notionally, which cat.
That distinction, general, am and en versus specific, that really is the foundation, isn't it?
It really is.
Your source also brings up a related common mistake here. Using the when you're actually talking about things in general.
Yes, this happens a lot.
Like saying, I like the pizza, when you just mean you like pizza overall as a food.
Exactly. That often comes from how articles work or don't work with general concepts in someone's first language. In standard English, when you talk about concepts generally or categories or most uncountable nouns like types of food, abstract ideas, materials, you usually don't use any article.
Right, the zero article.
That's the term, yeah.
And your source gives the correct examples. I like pizza. I love chocolate.
Perfect. I like pizza means pizza in general is something you enjoy. I love chocolate means chocolate as a substance, as a general thing, is something you love.
Whereas I like the pizza would mean,
You like this specific pizza. Maybe the one we're eating right now or the one we had last night. And I love the chocolate would point to a specific bar or box of chocolates. The absence of the article makes it general. That makes it specific.
okay, let's try to really nail this down with a few more examples based on the source's logic. If I see some random dog in the park, I'd say,
I saw a dog, any dog.
but if I'm talking about, say, my sister's poodle that you know well,
Then it's I saw the dog because it's specific and understood between you.
okay. And if I just generally enjoy coffee,
I love coffee. Zero article. General concept.
not I love the coffee.
Not unless you mean a specific batch or type you just tasted, like, I love the coffee they serve here.
Got it. And if I'm drinking one particular cup,
You might say, this is a good cup of coffee,
Yeah.
introducing it as one instance. Or if there's a pot on the table, could you pass me the coffee? Referring to that specific pot.
it's like a signaling system for specificity.
It is. And just quickly, the source mentions a and an, and follows the same rule general, singular, but you use it before a vowel sound.
Yeah, the sound, not just the letter.
Right, so it's a cat, but an hour. A university, because university starts with a Y sound, but an umbrella.
Okay, that's a good clarification. So mastering articles, as your source suggests, really adds that precision. It tells your listener if something is new and general or known and specific. It definitely makes you sound more natural.
It does. It provides crucial context right within the sentence structure. Native speakers use it almost without thinking.
Okay, so moving away from these tiny but very important articles, your source shifts our focus to another area where a tiny change adding or missing a letter signals a grammar issue.
Yes, this is another big one highlighted in the source.
Yeah.
Forgetting to add the S or ES ending to verbs in the present simple tense.
Oh, the third person singular is.
Exactly. Specifically when the subject is he, she, or it.
This trips up so many people. Your source gives a really clear example of the mistake.
Yeah.
Someone might say, she walked to work every day.
Now, walked is a verb. It's the past tense form.
Right.
But the phrase every day signals a routine, a habit. And in English, we use the present simple tense for habits.
So even though walked is grammatically correct in the past, it's the wrong tense for this meaning.
Precisely. The meaning is habitual present action. So your source gives the correct form. She walks to work every day. That little S on walks is essential in standard grammar here.
And your source helpfully lays out the basic rule for present simple again, which is always worth hearing. For I, you, we, they.
You just use the base form of the verb, the simplest form, like the source examples. I work, they play, no S.
Easy enough. You listen, we agree, they understand.
Correct. The verb stays in its base form.
And here's the crucial part where the mistake happens for he, she, or it.
So you have to add S or is to the end of the verb in the present simple. The source gives examples like he works, she watches, it goes.
That ending, the S or ikas, it's like a grammatical flag, isn't it?
It is. It's the specific marker in the present simple tense that tells you the subject is third person singular. It's a core conjugation rule for this tense and these subjects.
And you mentioned es sometimes.
Yeah, there are slight spelling rules. We usually add es if the verb base ends in, sounds like ish, ish, s, or mes, x, or mesa. So watch becomes watches, miss becomes misses, wash becomes washes, fix becomes fixes, buzz becomes buzzes. Also for verbs ending in O, like go becomes goes, do becomes does.
Okay.
And for verbs ending in a consonant followed by Y, you change the Y to I and add E's, like study becomes studies, try becomes tries.
Ah, those little spelling tweaks are good to know too, kind of building on the source's main point.
They are,
Ah.
but the main principle from the source is just remembering that he, she, it need, that zin sound on the verb in the present simple.
Your source suggests really listening to yourself speak. When you talk about a he, she, or it's doing something regularly, actively remember that is.
That self-monitoring is so important. Just being conscious of the rule, okay, third person singular, present simple, need the S, can help you catch it. It's worth practicing, too. Say sentences out loud. He lives nearby. She teaches math. It looks good. My phone rings constantly.
And this applies to state verbs too, right? Like have or like.
Yes, absolutely. It's not just action verbs. It becomes he has a car, she likes tea, he wants coffee, she seems tired. It's a very consistent rule across most verbs in the present simple with these subjects.
It's a small detail, phonetically, but grammatically, it's a big signal in English.
It really is. It's fundamental to conjugating verbs correctly in this very common tense. Getting it right makes your English sound much more standard and accurate when talking about present habits or facts concerning he, she, or it.
Okay, so from verb endings, let's shift to sentence structure. Your source identifies question word order as another frequent hurdle, often because people translate directly.
Oh, definitely. This is a major one. As your source rightly points out, the way questions are formed in English can be quite different from many other languages. Learners might just take a statement and, raise their voice at the end.
Right. Or they use the word order from their native language.
Which often doesn't quite work in English.
And the classic example your source provides for this mistake is asking something like, you like coffee, when you mean it as a proper yes-no question.
Yeah, while people might understand you, especially informally, that structure isn't the standard way to form most questions in English. Standard English depends heavily on what we call auxiliary verbs, or helping verbs to build questions.
And these auxiliary verbs usually go where?
Right at the beginning of the sentence, typically before the subject.
Okay. Your source clearly outlines the common structures. For many questions, particularly in simple tenses like present and past, and when the main verb isn't be, you need to start with do or does.
Correct. So that example, you like coffee. The standard form is do you like coffee? Do is the auxiliary, then the subject you, then the main verb like.
And if the subject was he, she, or it.
Then you'd use does, connecting back to that third person's ever rule we just talked about. So does she like coffee? Does he work here? Does it snow in winter here? The does carries the S.
Got it. Then your source addresses questions using the verb to be, am, is, are, was, were. How does that work?
With be verbs, it's actually simpler in a way. The be verb itself just moves to the front, before the subject. No need for do or does.
Oh, okay. And their example is she coming to the party?
Exactly. The is moves before she. Other examples. Are they ready? Am I late? Was he at the meeting yesterday? You use this structure for questions about identity, state, location, or ongoing actions in continuous tenses. So not he is a doctor, but is he a doctor?
Right. The verb inverts with the subject. And the third category your source mentions involves modal verbs like can, will, should your will for the future. Examples were can you swim and will it be there?
Yes. With modal verbs, can, could, should, must, may, might, etc. And also with will for future questions, that modal verb or will acts like the auxiliary and comes first.
So it takes the place of do or be at the start.
Pretty much. It moves to the front. Should I call him? Must we leave now? Could you repeat that? Will it be sunny tomorrow? The pattern is generally modal will plus subject plus main verb, usually the base form.
So the really big takeaway here from your source about questions is English heavily relies on putting these auxiliary or modal verbs right at the beginning.
Yes.
Just using statement order and hoping your intonation makes it a question. Well, it might work sometimes informally, but it's not the standard structure.
Not for most question types, no. Mastering this use of dodos, be verbs, and modals at the front of questions is really fundamental for asking questions correctly and naturally in English.
It's a core piece of English sentence structure, isn't it?
It really is. It requires a different mental pathway than just translating word for word from languages that might form questions differently, maybe just with intonation or a question particle at the end.
And it seems this whole idea of auxiliary verbs being important pops up again in the next common mistake your source points out.
Yeah.
which is related to negative sentences.
It is indeed. They're closely linked. Your source highlights the mistake of leaving out the auxiliary verb do when making negative statements, especially, again, in the present simple tense.
And the example error they give is someone saying, I not like spicy food.
Right. Which, again, you can see how that might make sense if you're translating directly from a language where you just add a negative particle, like not near the verb or after the subject.
But standard English needs more structure there.
Yes. For negation in the simple present and simple past tenses, using did not or didn't for past, you need that auxiliary do combined with not.
And your source provides the correct form. I don't like spicy food.
Exactly. Don't is the contraction of do not, which is standard in spoken English. And following the pattern for he, she, it, you use doesn't, does not.
Bringing back the does for the third person singular.
So she doesn't like spicy food. He doesn't live here. It doesn't matter. You need that do or does auxiliary to form the negative correctly in these tenses.
Your source really hammers this home, stating something like, so always remember in English, negatives and questions need an auxiliary verb like do or does.
Yes, linking those 2 points is key. It shows this isn't just a random rule for questions. It's part of a larger system in English where do acts as a crucial helper verb for both forming questions and forming negatives in the simple tenses.
That's a really fundamental structural feature of English that learners just have to internalize, isn't it? You can't usually just stick not in there by itself.
Not in these cases, no. Do support, as linguists sometimes call it, is essential here.
Okay, let's tackle what your source calls a classic mistake. This feels like one of the really persistent, tricky ones for a lot of learners. Mixing up the past simple and the present perfect tenses.
Yes. This is definitely a common area of confusion. Understandably so, because both tenses often talk about things that happened in the past.
But they do it differently, right? The focus is different.
Exactly. The main difference often lies in the connection or lack of connection to the present moment, and especially whether a specific time in the past is mentioned.
Your source highlights a couple ways this goes wrong. First, the example of incorrect usage. I have went.
Right. This mistake is about using the wrong form of the verb with the present perfect. The present perfect structure is have or has plus the past participle, sometimes called the third form of the main verb.
Okay.
For the verb go, the simple past is went, but the past participle is gone. So the correct present perfect is I have gone.
So went is the simple past form, not the participle needed after have.
Precisely. Learners sometimes mistakenly use the simple past form there. You see it with other irregular verbs too, like maybe saying I have saw instead of I have seen, or I have ate instead of I have eaten, or I have did instead of I have done. So step 1 is knowing the correct past participle form for the verb you're using.
That makes sense. So getting the verb form right is the first hurdle. What was the second incorrect example your source gave? It was, I have seen him yesterday.
Yes, and this one gets right to the heart of the usage difference between the two tenses. Now, have seen is the correct present perfect verb form. That part's okay.
Right.
But the problem is combining it with yesterday. In standard English, you generally cannot use the present perfect tense with a specific finished past time marker like yesterday.
Okay, why not? What's the rule or the principle the source gives us to keep them straight?
Your source states the key distinction very clearly. Use past simple with specific times, and the flip side, use present perfect when the time is not mentioned or not specific.
Okay, so in I have seen him yesterday, the word yesterday is the issue. It pins the action to a specific completed time in the past.
Exactly.
And according to the source's rule, if you specify the past time, you need the past simple.
Correct. So the sentence should be, I saw him yesterday, using the simple past form saw.
So anytime you name the time, like last week in 2019, 5 minutes ago, when I was young.
If you're pinpointing when in the past it happened, yes, the past simple is generally the tense to use. Think of it as putting a definite timestamp on the event. They arrived last night. Past simple arrived. She finished the report this morning. Assuming this morning is finished, past simple finished. We met in college. Past simple met.
Your source gives a really handy tip based on this. If you say a time word phrase like yesterday, last week, or in 2019, use past simple.
That's a great rule of thumb. It covers a huge number of cases. If you see or want to use a word or phrase that clearly marks when in the past the action was completed, reach for the past simple.
Okay. And the other side of that, according to the source, is if there's no specific time mentioned, or the time isn't the point, Then the present perfect comes into play.
Right. The source uses its examples again. I saw her yesterday is correct because yesterday is specific, but I have seen her before is also correct because before isn't a specific point in time. It just means at some point in the past, the experience exists.
So the present perfect is more about the experience or maybe the result lasting until now.
Often, yes. It's used for life experiences. Have you ever been to Japan? Or for actions that started in the past and are still true. She's lived here for 10 years. Implies she still lives here. Or for past actions where the result is important now, even if we don't say when it happened, oh no, I have lost my wallet. The important thing is it's missing now.
So it connects the past to the present in some way, while the past simple just places it firmly in the past.
That's a very common way to think about it. Your source focuses mainly on that specific versus non-specific time distinction, which is a really practical and effective starting point for learners who find these two tenses confusing.
That time word tip from the source seems like a fantastic tool to help make the right choice most of the time.
It really is. It captures the core functional difference between them in a very usable way based on how your source presents it.
Wow, okay. We've covered a lot of specific grammar points from your source articles, the present simples, question structures, negatives, and this past simple present perfect tangle.
Quite a few key areas.
But your source also does something really important, I think. It kind of zooms out for a moment, shifting the perspective.
Yes, it offers that really crucial, comforting piece of realism. Grammar mistakes happen. Everyone makes them, even native speakers sometimes in casual speech.
Right.
And importantly, many of these small mistakes, the kind we've been talking about, often don't actually stop communication, especially in informal chats.
That's such a relief to hear. Like, if you miss an A or use the wrong tense, people will probably still figure out what you mean.
Most of the time, yes. The message usually gets through. Your source definitely validates that communication is the primary goal.
But
then, yeah, the source pivots slightly. While mistakes might not always block understanding, working on these common ones is important if your goal is to sound, well, more fluent, more natural.
So there's a difference between just being understood
Mhm.
and actually sounding proficient and comfortable using the language's natural patterns.
Exactly. Targeting these specific, frequent errors that the source highlights helps to smooth out your speech. It makes you sound less like you're actively translating or searching and more like a confident, natural speaker of English.
And your source adds another interesting layer here, acknowledging that spoken English isn't always rigid. It mentions flexibility,
Right.
especially in informal talk or different regions.
Right. It touches on the idea that grammar rules can sometimes be a bit more relaxed in very casual conversation compared to formal writing or careful speech.
And this is where they introduce that really interesting example. Sometimes hearing, she don't like coffee, particularly in informal American English.
Yeah. Now, based on the standard rules we discussed for present, simple negatives, he, she, it take, does not, or doesn't,
The correct form should be, she doesn't like coffee.
that's the standard grammatically prescribed form, yes.
But your source points out that you might actually hear, she don't, sometimes.
Exactly. It notes that this non-standard usage does exist in some very informal spoken contexts, particularly in certain dialects or social groups within American English.
So the source isn't saying she don't is correct grammar.
No, not at all. It's not endorsing it as standard or correct according to the rules taught widely. It's making a descriptive point. It's describing a feature of language as it's sometimes actually used by some native speakers in certain situations, contrasting that with the formal prescriptive rules we've been focusing on.
That's a really important distinction. It shows language is alive, and there can be a gap between the textbook rules and how people talk every day.
It does. For a learner aiming for standard international English or professional communication, she doesn't, is absolutely the form to aim for and use.
But hearing she don't shouldn't completely throw you off. It's just an example of informal variation that your source acknowledges exists.
Exactly. It adds context. It shows that even native speech operates on a spectrum of formality and rule adherence.
So what's the main takeaway message here? Balancing the rules with reality.
The source sums it up beautifully, I think.
Mhm.
It's basically, don't be afraid to make mistakes, be brave, speak, but also listen carefully and correct yourself when you can.
That feels like incredibly solid practical advice.
It is. It encourages you to have the courage to communicate, even if it's not perfect, but also to cultivate the habit of listening, noticing, and gradually refining your language. It's that blend of being bold, but also being attentive.
A cycle of speaking, noticing, adjusting, and improving. Okay, so based on this whole deep dive into your source material, exploring all these common mistakes and the ways the source suggests fixing them, here's the challenge your source sets out for you, the listener.
Step one is simple awareness. Just listen to yourself speak English today. Pay a bit more attention than usual to the words and structures you're using. Maybe even record yourself for a minute or two if you're feeling brave.
Step 2, pick one thing, just one of the common mistakes we talked about today that you feel applies to you. Maybe it's articles, maybe it's that present simple as, maybe question order negatives, or that past simple present perfect confusion. Don't try to fix everything at once.
Focus is key. And step three, practice the correct form out loud. Actively produce sentences using the structure you've chosen. So if you picked the S rule, deliberately make sentences about he, she, it. He works downtown. She likes movies. It rains a lot here. Say them. Get your mouth used to the correct pattern.
Right. Or if you picked articles, look around the room and describe things, making conscious choices. A chair, the window, no article light.
That active practice is crucial.
And your source adds one more suggestion, which I think is really powerful for building confidence. Reflect on a grammar mistake you used to make, but you've managed to fix.
Yeah, think back. What was it? Maybe you always forgot the is or mixed up tenses. How did you fix it? What rule or strategy finally clicked for you?
Remembering past successes really helps, doesn't it? It shows you can improve and maybe reveals learning techniques that work well for you.
Absolutely. It proves progress is possible and reinforces your ability to tackle these challenges.
Wow. We have really gone deep into this source today. We've pulled out those, what was it, 5 key areas: articles, the present simple as, question word order, auxiliary verbs and negatives, and the past simple versus present perfect distinction.
The big ones highlighted in the source.
And importantly, we've talked through the clear, simple rules and tips your source provides to help you manage each one with lots of examples.
And hopefully reinforce that really valuable message from the source. Mistakes are okay, they're part of learning. Practice makes the difference. And overcoming that fear of making errors is maybe the biggest step.
It really is. And, that point your source made about the informal she-don't usage, it leaves us with a really interesting question to ponder, doesn't it? Building on everything we discussed, how does knowing about both the standard grammar rules and the fact that informal variations exist, how does that affect how you approach learning or listening?
Yeah. Do you aim purely for the standard textbook form, or does knowing about variations make you listen differently, perhaps be more understanding of different ways people speak?
It's that complexity of a real living language.
It is.
And speaking of moving forward, your source material actually gives a little hint about what's coming up next. It mentions the topic for the following day is about telling stories in English and making your speech more engaging.
Oh, that sounds like a perfect next step. Taking these grammar foundations and applying them to something more dynamic and communicative like storytelling.
Exactly. Putting the building blocks to work.
Sounds great.
So we really hope this deep dive into your source material has been useful, maybe shed some light on those common grammar sticking points, and given you some practical, simple strategies from the source to work on them.
Remember the advice. Keep speaking, keep listening actively, keep practicing those specific points, and try to see mistakes not as failures, but just as signposts on your journey to sounding more fluent and confident.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive today.